Bienvenidas, comadres and friends, to our September 2020 teleconference. This is Julia Abrantes, Submissions Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. We wish you and your familias health, safety, and love. We encourage you to put laughter into your life. Prayer and laughter help us relieve stress, and I suspect that we all need all the help we can get. Podcasts are now uploaded to our website. Feel free to download to listen to any of your favorite interviews. Mil gracias to Comadre Dora for doing this labor of love for us. Our September 2020 teleconference features Book of the Month author Natalia Sylvester and conversations with author Julia Alvarez. First, a bit of history about our book club. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York at Comadre Maria Ferrer's apartment. After a hiatus, it was restarted in March 2007. Comadre Johanna Castillo, at the time national organizer of the book club and former Comadres board member, said, "We are launching the book club to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores and to support our writers. Now, more than ever, we need to support our Latino writers. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city. We have clubs in 12 cities, and many meet virtually now. There's sure to be one that can fit into your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not help us start one? For more information about our book club, please visit our website at latinolit.com. We started these teleconferences, Reading with Las Comadres, in October of 2006. We are in our 14th year. We created the Reading with Las Comadres teleconference and book club in an effort to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and different perspectives on Latino cultures and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. So please invite others to join us. We are grateful to the publishers, Clarion Books and Algonquin, for their support of this teleconference with free books for our early registrants. For more information about the authors and publishers, please visit our website at latinolit.com. I'm going to come back to our Book of the Month author, Natalia Sylvester. And right now we'll start with our conversations with author, Julia Alvarez. Julia Alvarez left the Dominican Republic for the United States in 1960 at the age of 10. She is the author of 6 novels, 3 books of nonfiction, 3 collections of poetry, and 11 books for children and young adults. She has taught and mentored writers in schools and communities across America and, until her retirement in 2016, was a writer in residence at Middlebury College. Her work has garnered wide recognition, including a Latina Leader Award in Literature from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, the Hispanic Heritage Award in Literature, the Woman of the Year by Latina Magazine, and inclusion in the New York Public Library's program, The Hand of the Poet, Original Manuscripts by 100 Masters, from John Donne to Julia Alvarez. In the Time of Butterflies, with over 1 million copies in print, was selected by the National Endowment for the Arts as its National Big Read program, and in 2013, President Obama awarded Alvarez the National Medal of Arts in recognition of her extraordinary storytelling. Our interviewer, Comadre Tess, is a retired academic librarian, having worked at New York City College of Technology of the City University of New York. She is a past president of Reforma and continues to bring library and information services to Latinos and underserved communities. Comadre Tess, take it away.
Bienvenida, Julia. How are you?
Oh, Tess, Comadre Tess, I'm, as we all are, on a learning curve with this new situation and not so new situation of the pandemic and the pandemics that we have been seeing with violence towards communities of color and exclusion from the economic opportunities available to some. So many things on the list. But I'm so happy to be here and to discover the Comadres Book Club, which I did not know about until I was invited to be one of your guests.
Well, thank you. I'm just delighted to be with you also this evening and to be joined by Las Comadres and Friends Book Club. And some of the things you just touched on, you do bring out in this book. You've been very fortunate. You've written in many genres: poetry, essays, fiction, young adult. I found Afterlife to be different. It's your first novel in some years. Can you tell us how it came about?
Sure.
The writing of this book?
I actually have been writing for young readers and other books and nonfiction, but you're right to say it's my first novel in almost 15 years for adults. And I think it was a novel that it took me a while to sort of navigate the things I was trying to do. I had accomplished some things that I wanted to in fiction writing, and I had written with younger protagonists. And I wanted to write a book about an older protagonist, a Latina specifically, interested in what does it mean to be an elder storyteller, and what kind of story would that be that might be different from the books I might have written as a younger Latina writer. And so I say that it took me this long to integrate and to understand in my own life what that meant in order to be able to really, embody it and make it believable in my characters. So I think there was a time of reflection and understanding, and also a time of listening. I felt like I wanted to understand the time I was living in and reflect and come out of a new space rather than repeating the things that I had already done.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think this is what we would call a short novel, and they say it's much harder to write a short novel than a longer one. So how did you decide to write a short novel? That was another challenge, I imagine.
I know. I often joke that part of, my tradition as a Latina storyteller is kind of these rococo tales, the kind of 100 years of, not just 1 year of solitude or one day in the life, but 100 years of solitude. Complicated familias, stories branching out in all directions. That kind of tradition was the one I came from. But I've also always been an admirer of what I call the short lyrical novel. And, I wanted to, I've been an admirer of it and an admirer of that Japanese sensibility, which is very much the sensibility of the haiku, in which you take away all that is unnecessary so that what remains is charged. And I wanted a novel that was, I've always been interested in borders and hybrids, a novel that was lyrical and, had some of a poem's qualities, but also told a story like a novel. So also straddling that, that combination. And I thought of it as a novel that reflected the themes of the novels. How do we live in a world in crisis, in a diminished world, and still strive for the larger versions of ourselves with generosity and hope and love? And so I wanted a form that kind of reflected that stripped down quality, right to the bone. So I think that's where this comes from, both an admirer of a certain type of novel, but also an admirer, also wanting a novel that reflected in its structure what the themes of the novel is about.
Right. And did you find that you wrote a longer novel and then you had to cut it down, or was it easy just to be concise in your initial versions?
Are you kidding? 15 years. part of it is what is it that I don't know. You hear different people said it, but I think it started with Pascal when he wrote to a friend and he said, "Had I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter." So I think there were a lot of drafts. For me, writing is so much also about revision, and revision is that quality of reading your work as if someone else had written it. So you sort of take away a lot of the stuff that you feel is so necessary, but that the reader really ultimately doesn't need. So there was a lot of revision involved. I didn't set out to write a certain kind of novel because I like structure and size to come organically out of the material. But as I said, the themes in this novel, they're reflected in this kind of a structure. So in a sense, it was a larger novel in the sense that there were so many revisions to it, but also it was what I was striving for once I understood organically what the novel wanted to be.
Right. You begin the book with a poem. The prologue starts out as a poem, and it sets the tone. And we're introduced to Antonia. You use a lot of poetry and literary references in the book. They seem to keep Antonia focused. Can you tell us a little bit more why you chose this?
Well, again, it has to come out of the character, not the choice of the author. You really have to listen to the story and the characters you're writing about. And Antonia has been an English teacher all her life, teaching literature. And these words and these beautiful passages and this poetry just is kind of in her bloodstream. It runs through her mind, these quotes. But it wasn't enough that, she likes all this literature. Part of what the novel is exploring is, how do stories serve us? How can they help us? How can these beautiful passages, these words, when you really need them, when you really need direction, when you're lost, when everything has fallen apart, how can they help you? And what are the limits of what they can do? Antonia loves her literature and her words and her solitude, but what happens when someone shows up at her door with need? When you can't just quote a beautiful passage or, go into your little artistic tower. What does it mean to have been guided by stories and narratives that contain, the wisdom of the ages in them? What does it mean when the issues you read about or philosophize about show up at your door? And words are not enough. You can't just quote a beautiful passage to it. So it's also about activism and art and how and what the struggle is sometimes to try to honor them both.
Right. And, you do have the themes that you said. There's a lot of grief and fragmentation in regard to Estella and Mario's character, the situation of her coming up and being pregnant. But I do think you bring out the hope and the love through the story, which I think is very beautiful. So how did you go about developing their characters, or where did that come from organically?
Well,
Stella and Mario.
I'm in Vermont, and I often joke when I moved up here with this first sort of teaching job at Middlebury College, which was just supposed to be a year long, and I just knew something old. So we've watched, some changes happening, and so many of these younger writers and younger male writers and younger male readers in the Latinx community were raised by women like us, or by women reading our literature. So I think that every man in the world is a woman's son, and that has made a difference as women have claimed and come to the fore, in terms of the women's movement and in terms of being out there, in the workforce and juggling many lives.
Good. Getting back to the novel, you do bring in the whole feeling of sisterhood with the sisters, the four sisters. Is that a little autobiographical? Because I know you come from a family of four sisters.
Well, I think that, every novel is, even if it's not ostensibly autobiographical, it's emotionally autobiographical, because you write about things that are important to you, that you feel strongly about, that you're passionate about. And for me, sisterhood, whether we call it comadres or hermanas, or as Sandra and Ana Castillo and Denise would call ourselves, because we were each other's support system back then. We called ourselves las girlfriends, back then. It's to me been so critical to have sisters, and not just blood sisters, but to support each other when no one else was listening to us, to have that kind of bond. And I find that in our sort of so-called male patriarchal societies, that women were the strong part of my familia. The men went off to their work and their outside life, but it was my tias and my abuelitas and my madrinas and my primas and my sisters. We were, that was our support system. And when we came to this country in 1960, there weren't hardly any Dominicans around because they couldn't get out of the dictatorship. And having my sisters to really, kind of help me sift through what was happening, I think it was what helped us survive as women, right, as young women. And that's what I wanted. Sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There was so much what I wanted to do with Castilla Girls, too. I had read so many immigrant novels that were about male protagonists. And part of the thing that I wanted to do, just like I wanted with Afterlife, I didn't see that many novels with older Latina protagonists, where they wouldn't sort of sometimes the cliche abuelita or, curandera. What was an older, complicated Latina woman? What would that life be? What would that story be? And with Castilla Girls, what would the story of immigration be from a female point of view? What were the particular pressures and difficulties of being female in that experience? So yeah, sisterhood and the female point of view has been something that I've very much wanted to write into the Latinx. If we can talk about our canon or whatever, our literature.
Right, there is a lot more Latino literature out there, but there's still a lot of room for more. And
exactly.
I'm so happy that you endured and kept the fires going. But there's still a lot to do. What would you recommend to a young Latino writer? Is there any thoughts you would like to share as to spread your hope? Because there's definitely you're delivering hope in this book.
Well, I think that what I would say, because to be writing for 25 years, just one rejection after another, and then finally at 41 to come with the first novel, and a lot of my younger my students, feel so distraught if they hit, let's say, their 30s. And, they haven't yet made it. That I tell them that writing, if you take it up, storytelling is a way of life. It's not the products that come out of it are fine, but it's the ongoing habit of writing. It's a way of being and moving in the world. It's a way of being awake, I think, and paying attention. And that is something that I think I think we need to, young writers, to learn, to know that they're taking on not just, a project that they hope is going to be published, but a way of life. That's really an important aspect of it. It's kind of like a meditation practice, the writing practice, and so to do it because it's what's in you to do. Rumi has a wonderful poem where he says, "Let the beauty you love be what you do." Write out of that passion, and I think that's something I would encourage, young writers to think about it that way as a kind of practice. And we talked a little bit about at the beginning about activism and art. It's not just enough to develop it for yourself, but to be in service to your community, however you understand that, to the people in your Latinx community, to the people in your larger community, in your country, in your human family. That to me is only, one thing is right, and the other thing is to give it back, to give the passion that you brought forth, in order to fill the world with more of that kind of love and passion and connection. A civil rights activist, Howard Thurman, said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." So I think that's an important compass to use as a young writer.
And that's a beautiful way to end our interview, Julia, Comadre Julia. I appreciate your talking with us tonight, and we've all enjoyed your books, and we look forward to what comes next. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tess, for your questions, and to all the comadres for inviting me tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so now let's learn about our Book of the Month author, Natalia Sylvester. Natalia was born in Lima, Peru. She is the award-winning author of 2 novels for adults and a forthcoming young adult novel. Chasing the Sun was named Best Debut Book of 2014 by Latinidad magazine, and Everyone Knows You Go Home won an International Latino Book Award and the 2019 Jesse H. Jones Award for Best Work of Fiction from the Texas Institute of Letters. Sylvester's essays have appeared in the New York Times, Bustle, Catapult, Latina Magazine, and McSweeney's Publishing, and are forthcoming in various anthologies. She received a BA in Creative Writing from the University of Miami and now lives and writes in Texas. Comadre Natalia, thank you for your patience and for joining us this evening.
Yes, of course. Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So for our listeners, for our readers who are listening in this evening, can you tell them a little bit about your book?
So Running is my first YA novel, and it's about a Cuban-American teenager named Mari who's living in Miami, and her father is running, he's a senator who's running for president. And throughout the course of his campaign, she starts to learn more, not only about him, but also just about her own political beliefs, and realizing that they don't necessarily align with his. And so, at a time when she's kind of coming of age politically, starting to kind of find her voice, starting to learn her privilege and unpack what that all means, and starting to kind of understand the different ways that power work with not only her family, but in just the world as a whole. She has to decide how to use her own voice, how to use her own power, and whether she will be, whether she'll find the courage to speak up, and in a way that might be against her father while the whole country is watching.
Okay, there's a lot there. So we're currently in a presidential election cycle. And we're coming down to the last 40 days before we all count our votes. And I wonder, was there any real life incidents that kind of sparked the idea of running?
I started running during our last presidential election, so it was 2016, and I was watching the news one morning, and I saw they were playing like a candidate's speech, and for some reason I just became really captivated by this speech, and not necessarily because of the candidate, but because behind him was his daughter, who was kind of just standing there very quietly. She seemed to be a teenager. I don't know exactly, but I was just very fascinated, and I just started wondering, like, what must be going through her mind in this moment. And it really kind of sparked this idea in me of, like, well, what would happen if she's standing behind him quietly, but inside she really wants to speak out against him. And that resonated with me for so many ways, just because I think we have all known the difficulties that arise when we don't agree with loved ones politically. And for Maddie, of course, that's further exacerbated by the fact that she's 15 and she doesn't necessarily feel like she is someone who has a lot of power to be able to speak up against her father, especially as a young Latina. I grew up, and I think many of us can relate to just this idea of having grown up being expected to just be quiet, and it's not quiet but always polite. Like, don't disturb anyone. Okay, all that,
Right.
And this idea of talking back to your father was just blasphemous.
Absolutely.
So,
Continue. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. No, it's okay.
No, I was going to say, because I know even as an adult, I was 55 when my father passed away, but even before then, he always, he would always make a comment. Doesn't matter if I'm shorter than you. If you're out of place, I'm going to put you in your place.
I feel, and I thought of that a lot with Maddie too, because like her place is literally behind him, and always assuming to be in support of him, and she ends up being someone who really struggles with that, and has to maybe see if she has it in her to really challenge it.
Yeah. Well, before we get further into the book, I wanted to go back to the beginning of the book, because in the beginning chapters of the book, she had a beautiful relationship with Gloria, her housekeeper, nanny, part of the village that was raising her. And I just found that so special as someone that she could relate to, because I think we all have somebody like that in our lives. Do you want to talk a little bit about that relationship?
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I appreciate that. So the very first word in the book is Gloria. The book opens with her, and really that's actually how I wrote the first line. Like, I don't often, I'm very much someone who revises and will write a whole book to the point that I might not even recognize the first draft. But for some reason, the first few pages really stayed pretty true from the beginning to the end of the writing process. And I think it's because they were just so rooted in this really tender relationship that Maddie has with Gloria. And, Gloria is like this anchor for her to a world that doesn't judge her and that doesn't try to shape her into someone she's not. When she experiences that kind of pressure so often from her father or from her father's campaign staff, who will literally give her cue cards of how to speak, and they have a media coach to train her on how to act and everything. And it was just really important for her to have someone like Gloria in her life, someone who maybe could remind her that she's good enough just as she is, and that she is able to become who she wants to be on her own terms.
Right.
And also even just throughout the course of the book, though, because one of the things that Maddie's also learning and realizing is that she's realizing how much privilege she does have, even as someone who has felt silenced and who has experienced things throughout the course of the book and throughout her life, like sexism and discrimination. And despite that, though, she does end up having to come to terms with what happens when you have this friendship in which the power dynamics are still uneven. Like, she is still the boss's daughter. Gloria works for her family. And so she has to kind of confront this idea of like, yeah, like, you know, bless you, all the ways that she feels towards Gloria, like, are those, you know, does Gloria feel the same? Has she ever felt like uncomfortable? Has she ever felt there are things that she couldn't say to her when Maddie feels like she can say anything to her? And I thought that was something that was important to me, because I feel like we tend to kind of back away so much from any conversation that causes us to confront our own privilege, as if it's something that's pointing a finger, as if it's something we should feel bad about having. I think that privilege exists in so many different ways, and it's super complex. It's rarely linear. And if anything, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it could be a really powerful thing if we learn how to use it to make sure that others who maybe aren't as privileged are not being harmed and are in fact gaining the same opportunities that we have because of unearned privilege. So Tonya just kind of opened the story up in so many ways.
I think so too. And I just love that relationship with her and Gloria. I just love that relationship that they had. And as you stated, you know, Mari, she's in the 10th grade, and as the book evolves, she's starting to find, I want to say, her new footing in life. Her eyes are being opened during her father's political campaign, and as the events unfold throughout this book. Do you think that your story, with all the activism that's going on today in today's society, and I know this book, you started writing it in 2016, you probably had no idea what was going to happen in this year, in 2020, not besides the pandemic. I'm talking, you know, Black Lives Matter and how the Black and brown lives are being more in the news, and youngsters, everyone, young and old, are becoming more active. Do you think that your book is going to inspire others to become active?
I hope so. I do. I hope so. I think that I will say that I was inspired as I was writing it by, you know, the activists who have been working for generations to, you know, to protest and dismantle systemic racism, and you know, and even while I was writing, you know, running even 2016, 2017, like, the injustices that are happening at our border have been happening for years, not just with this administration. You know, like, so many of the things that, even though none of us could have known that 2020 could have reached this point, it didn't happen overnight, and so many of these injustices have been happening for generations. And so in a way, I think that while obviously I couldn't have predicted it, I was writing it with an awareness of, you know, the reason that Maddie and her friends, she finds friends in the book who are activists, the reason that they take the actions that they do is because they know their voices deserve to be heard. They know that they can't just wait to become old enough to vote. They know that that protests can be powerful, that their voices are powerful, their actions and their choices are powerful, that when those in power are abusing that power and not living up to the promises or the responsibilities to the people. And, you know, even in the case, like we've seen happen, you know, last week with Breonna Taylor, you know, I mean, it's not even that justice wasn't served, it was that it's not even accountability, even at the least. And so there's, like, to me, it was important that that my characters, even though they can't vote, and even though maybe not all of them within the narrative have those rights, you know, there's people who even, you know, who don't have the right to vote, even regardless of their age, because of their documentation status, whether they're formerly incarcerated, and depending on some states, they don't have the right to vote. And as we know, like, the rights particularly with people of color, the voting rights are very often suppressed. And so I know, yes, this book kind of centers around an election, but there's just so much to be done leading up to that election and even after it. And I feel like that's the moment we're in now, is that the vote is only one part of the work, and it's super important, but it's, movements throughout history are the things that fuel change. They're the things that cause cultural shifts. Our legislators don't just kind of wake up one day and think, oh, I'm going to vote on this law. It doesn't just occur to them. They have to, they are often having to be pressured by the people. And so I was very, like I said, inspired by the activists who have been doing that, who have refused to be quiet in the face of things like police brutality and racial injustice, and a completely racist and unjust immigration system that we have. And I think that in the same way that those activists inspired the characters in my book, I would hope that the characters in my book could continue that same work of inspiring others.